I'm Maeve, 35 years old, and until last month, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 8 years with Jason, my rock, my everything. Then came that phone call while I was at work. "I want a divorce," he said coldly. "From now on, you'll only speak to my lawyer." I was blindsided, shattered. When I finally gathered my courage to meet this lawyer, I walked into his office composed but breaking inside. "Yes, I am the wife," I said. The lawyer's face turned ashen. "The wife? But Jason told me..." "If you're wondering where this story goes, stick around. Let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this journey of betrayal and redemption." I met Jason at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. I was working the event for my marketing firm, making sure everything ran smoothly for our client. He was there as a donor, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, with that confident smile that lights up a room. When our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, it was like one of those movie moments I never believed actually happened in real life. "You look like you could use a break," he said, handing me a glass of champagne after he'd watched me running around putting out fires for an hour. I laughed. "That obvious, huh?" "Professional observation. I've been watching you hold this entire event together. It's impressive." That was Jason, charming, attentive, and somehow always making me feel like the most important person in any room. He was 30, already making waves as an investment banker, ambitious and driven, but with a playfulness that balanced his serious side. Our romance was a whirlwind. After that first meeting, we were inseparable. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, weekend trips to little bed and breakfasts in Michigan, long walks along Lake Michigan, discussing everything from childhood memories to our dreams for the future. Within 6 months, we were living together in his downtown apartment. By our 1-year anniversary, he proposed during a surprise trip to Napa Valley. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," he told me as he slipped the 3-carat diamond ring onto my finger. "You're everything I've been looking for." We married in a gorgeous ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, surrounded by 200 of our closest friends and family. Everything was perfect. The weather, the flowers, the food. Everyone commented on how we couldn't take our eyes off each other. We were that couple the one others looked at with envy, wondering what our secret was. The first 5 years were everything I'd dreamed marriage could be. We traveled extensively: Paris, Tokyo, Sydney. We hosted dinner parties that our friends still talk about. We built our careers side by side, supporting each other through late nights and stressful projects. Jason moved up quickly at his investment firm, becoming the youngest partner in the company's history. I thrived in my marketing career, eventually becoming executive creative director at one of Chicago's top agencies. We had our arguments, of course, what couple doesn't? But they never lasted long. Jason had this way of diffusing tension with humor, of making me remember why I fell in love with him in the first place. We always went to bed having resolved our differences, often ending the night tangled in each other's arms. 2 years ago, we bought our dream home in the North Shore suburbs, a stunning 5-bedroom colonial with a view of the lake. It was a big step, especially with the price tag, but Jason insisted we deserved it. "This is where we'll build our family," he said as we stood in the empty living room after closing. "Can't you just see our kids running around this place?" We had been trying for a baby for about a year at that point without success. I was beginning to worry, but Jason always reassured me that it would happen when the time was right. We agreed to give it another year before seeking medical help. Looking back, I think that's when things first began to shift, though. The changes were so subtle I barely noticed them. Jason started working later hours, coming home well after dinner many nights. His phone would ring and he'd step out of the room to take calls. When I asked about it, he'd kiss my forehead and tell me it was just work stress. They were handling some major new clients, and the pressure was intense. "Just a rough patch," he'd say. "It'll calm down soon." But it didn't calm down. 6 months ago, the distance between us became impossible to ignore. The man who used to text me several times throughout the day just to say he missed me now barely responded to my messages. Our intimate life, once passionate and frequent, dwindled to occasional perfunctory encounters that left me feeling more lonely than satisfied. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect. I planned surprise date nights, bought new lingerie, suggested weekend getaways. Jason would participate half-heartedly, his mind clearly elsewhere. When I finally broke down one night and asked if he was having an affair, he seemed genuinely shocked by the question. "How could you even think that?" he demanded. "I've been killing myself at work to give us the life we have. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under?" I suggested marriage counseling. That was the first time I saw real anger from him. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to fix our marriage," he snapped. "We're fine. I just need you to be patient while I handle these work issues." So I was patient. I backed off, gave him space, tried to be understanding, all while feeling increasingly invisible in my own marriage. The last truly intimate moment we shared was exactly 17 days before everything fell apart. It was a Sunday morning. Jason had actually been home all weekend, a rarity in recent months. We had coffee on the patio, watching the sun sparkle on the lake. He seemed present in a way he hadn't been in ages, asking about my latest campaign, laughing at my stories about office politics. When he took my hand and led me back to bed, I felt hopeful for the first time in months. "I've missed you," he whispered against my skin. For those few hours, I had my husband back. The connection, the tenderness, the passion we'd always shared. I fell asleep in his arms, believing we'd turned a corner. I didn't know then that it was actually goodbye. It was Tuesday, just after 10 in the morning. I was standing in our client's conference room midway through presenting a new campaign to Midwest Health's executive team. 8 months of work was coming to fruition, and I could feel the energy in the room. They were loving our concept. My phone had been on silent, tucked away in my bag, but I noticed it lighting up repeatedly with calls from the same number. Jason's number. He knew how important this presentation was. We'd talked about it for weeks. He'd even helped me rehearse my talking points the weekend before. For him to call repeatedly during this time meant something had to be wrong. "I'm so sorry," I said to the room. "I need to take this call. It might be an emergency." I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, imagining car accidents, hospitalizations, terrible news about a family member. "Jason, what's wrong? Are you okay?" There was a moment of silence, just long enough to ratchet my anxiety even higher. Then his voice, but not the warm, affectionate tone I knew. This was cold, detached, like a stranger was speaking. "Maeve, I'm filing for divorce." 5 words that stopped my world. I actually looked around, convinced this had to be some kind of practical joke. "What, Jason? What are you talking about?" "I've been thinking about this for a long time. Our marriage isn't working. I've already moved out. I'm staying at a hotel for now." "Moved out?" "When I just saw you this morning before work." My voice was rising. I was aware of people walking past, glancing curiously in my direction. "I had movers come after you left. I've taken my personal belongings. Everything else we can sort out through legal channels." "Legal channels? Jason, can we please just talk about this?" "Whatever is wrong, we can fix it. Let's get counseling, take some time." He cut me off. "There's nothing to fix, Maeve. I've made my decision. From now on, you'll only speak to my lawyer. His office will contact you to set up a meeting." "Your lawyer, Jason, you can't be serious. We've been married for 8 years. You can't just end things with a phone call and refer me to your lawyer. It's better this way. Cleaner. I've left some paperwork at the house for you to review before the meeting. Goodbye, Maeve. Jason, wait. The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I stood in that corporate hallway phone clutched in my trembling hand, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My lungs couldn't seem to get enough air. The polished marble floor beneath my feet appeared to be tilting. I don't know how long I stood there before Sarah, my creative director, came looking for me. Maeve. The clients are wondering if everything's okay. Maeve. Her concerned face swam into focus. My God, you're white as a sheet. What happened? My husband just divorced me over the phone. I said the words sounding unreal as they left my mouth. Sarah's eyes widened. She immediately took charge, telling the clients I had a family emergency, gathering my materials, calling me a car. I moved through it all in a fog, functioning on autopilot, while my mind tried to process the impossible thing that had just happened. The drive home was a blur. I kept calling Jason back, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I texted him repeatedly confused, angry, pleading messages that received no response. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I was oscillating between devastation and fury. Our house, the dream home we'd bought together, looked exactly the same from the outside. But the moment I walked in, I could feel the difference. A hollowness, an absence. I moved from room to room, noting what was missing. His clothes from the closet, his toiletries from the bathroom, the vintage watch collection he kept on his dresser, his grandfather's chess set that always sat on the shelf in his office. He'd left very little behind, just the furniture and items we'd purchased together, as though he was meticulously excising himself from our shared life, taking only what was undeniably his. On our perfectly made bed lay a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of our prenuptial agreement, the one I'd signed somewhat reluctantly before our wedding, believing we'd never need it, along with a document outlining the proposed division of assets. Even in my emotional state, I could see it was heavily weighted in Jason's favor. Next to the envelope was a folded piece of paper with my name written in Jason's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Maeve, I'm sorry it came to this. Please review these documents before meeting with Thomas Wilson. He'll contact you soon. It would be in your best interest to accept these terms. J. Not Love Jason. Not even his full name. Just J. 8 years reduced to an initial. I sank onto the bed, clutching the paper, searching for any hint of the man I knew in those cold, impersonal lines. There was nothing. When I finally gathered enough strength to check our joint accounts online, I found them nearly emptied. Jason had left just enough to cover basic household expenses for a month. 8 years of marriage, and he'd reduced my financial security to 30 days. I didn't sleep that night. I alternated between sobbing uncontrollably and staring numbly at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I'd missed, clues to what had gone so catastrophically wrong. By morning, exhaustion had given way to a kind of disconnected panic, my body going through the motions while my mind remained trapped in an endless loop of questions without answers. In the harsh light of day, looking at my swollen face in the bathroom mirror, I had the first real moment of clarity since Jason's call. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. This was a deliberate attempt to blindside me, to leave me emotionally devastated and financially vulnerable. The careful planning, the timing, the coldness of it all, this wasn't impulsive. This was strategic, and I had no idea why. For an entire week, I existed in limbo. I called in sick to work, unable to face colleagues who would ask about Jason, about my red eyes and shaking hands. I tried reaching him countless times, calls, texts, emails, even a desperate visit to his office where a sympathetic but firm receptionist told me Mr. Harrington was unavailable and would remain so if I continued to create disturbances. I alternated between complete emotional collapse and frantic research trying to understand what was happening to my life. Late at night, I'd scour divorce websites trying to educate myself about a process I never thought I'd face. During the day, I'd search our home for clues for anything Jason might have left behind that could explain his sudden transformation from loving husband to cold stranger. The few friends I reached out to were shocked. As far as anyone knew, we were still the perfect couple. No one had seen this coming. Not my parents, not our mutual friends, not even Jason's sister Eliza, who called me in tears after I finally worked up the courage to tell her. "This doesn't make sense," she kept saying. "Jason adores you. There has to be some explanation." But there was no explanation forthcoming. Jason had effectively vanished from my life, leaving only the promise that his lawyer would contact me. When the call finally came, I was sitting on our patio staring blankly at the lake. The unknown number on my phone sent a surge of hope through me. Maybe it was Jason calling from a new phone, but the voice that greeted me was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Harrington, this is Thomas Wilson from Bradshaw, Wilson & Reed. I'm representing your husband in your divorce proceedings." The formal, slightly condescending tone made my skin crawl. This stranger was now the only connection to the man I'd built a life with. "I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the settlement proposal Mr. Harrington has put forward. The sooner we can reach an agreement, the smoother this process will be for everyone." "I haven't even had time to find my own lawyer," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. There was a pause, then a slight chuckle that made my blood boil. "Well, that's certainly your prerogative, Mrs. Harrington, though I should warn you that contesting the prenuptial agreement would be an expensive endeavor with very little chance of success. Given the circumstances, Mr. Harrington is being quite generous." "What circumstances?" I demanded. "What are you talking about?" Another pause. "I think it would be best to discuss these matters in person. How does Thursday at 2:00 work for you?" I wanted to refuse to insist on having my own representation present, but curiosity and desperation won out. What circumstances was he referring to? What did Jason think justified this treatment? "Fine. Thursday at 2:00. After hanging up, I immediately began researching divorce attorneys, calling several recommended by friends or well-reviewed online. The consensus was clear and disheartening with our prenup. My options might be limited, especially since Jason had apparently been planning this for some time. Every lawyer I spoke with advised me not to meet Wilson without representation. I called my best friend Lindsay that evening, pouring out my confusion and fear. Lindsay and I had been friends since college, and she'd been my rock through this nightmare week. "Absolutely do not go alone," she insisted. "This is a trap, Maeve. They're counting on you being emotional and unprepared." "But what if this is my only chance to find out what's really going on?" I argued. "Jason won't talk to me. No one seems to know anything. This lawyer is the only connection I have." "Then use the meeting to gather information, not to agree to anything," Lindsay said firmly. "Don't sign a single paper. Don't make any verbal agreements. Just listen, take notes, and say you need to consult your own attorney before proceeding." That night, I made a decision. I would go to the meeting not as the devastated wife Thomas Wilson was expecting, but as a woman determined to understand what was happening to her life before fighting for what was rightfully hers. I spent the next 2 days preparing, reading everything I could about divorce proceedings, about how to handle myself in meetings with opposing counsel. I carefully selected my outfit, a charcoal gray suit I'd worn to land major clients, my armor for difficult situations. I rehearsed what I would say, practiced keeping my face neutral even when my emotions threatened to overtake me. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's face, not the cold stranger who'd called to divorce me, but the man who'd held me just weeks earlier, who'd looked into my eyes and made me believe we still had a future. What had happened to that man? Was he ever real at all? Morning came with no answers. Only the certainty that by afternoon, I would at least be one step closer to the truth. Bradshaw, Wilson, and Reed occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. The reception area was all marble and glass, designed to intimidate with its cold perfection. I gave my name to a sleek receptionist who regarded me with a flash of something recognition pity before escorting me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Mr. Wilson will be with you shortly," she said, leaving me alone with my racing heart and sweating palms. I used the time to center myself, repeating Lindsay's advice like a mantra. Listen. Take notes. Don't agree to anything. Get information. When the door opened, Thomas Wilson was exactly what I'd expected. Late 50s, perfectly tailored suit, the confidence of a man accustomed to winning. What I hadn't expected was the slight falter in his step when he saw me, the momentary flash of surprise quickly masked by professional smoothness. "Mrs. Harrington, thank you for coming. I see you've come alone." "Yes." I kept my voice steady, my face neutral. "I was under the impression you'd be bringing counsel." He sat across from me, arranging papers from his leather portfolio. "I wanted to hear what you had to say first." Wilson nodded, a small smile playing at his lips that suggested he saw this as a tactical error on my part. "Very well. As I mentioned on the phone, Mr. Harrington is proposing a settlement that adheres to the terms of your prenuptial agreement with some additional considerations given the unique circumstances." There it was again, that vague reference to circumstances. I waited, not giving him the satisfaction of asking. Wilson slid a document across the table. "This agreement outlines the division of assets. Mr. Harrington will retain ownership of the investment properties and vacation home in Michigan. You will receive a lump sum payment of $250,000, which is actually $50,000 more than stipulated in the prenup." I scanned the document, careful to keep my expression unchanged, despite the shock rippling through me. The investment properties included our home, the one we'd chosen together, where we'd planned to raise our family. The lump sum was a fraction of what we'd built together over 8 years. "And what about our primary residence, the house we currently live in?" Wilson cleared his throat. "As you're aware, that property was purchased primarily with funds from Mr. Harrington's bonus. According to the prenup, assets acquired using premarital or individual earnings remain with the original owner." I remembered signing that prenup, believing it was just a formality, never imagining Jason would use it to leave me essentially homeless. "I see. And the joint accounts?" "Mr. Harrington has provided a detailed accounting of all marital assets. The remaining balances will be divided according to contribution percentages outlined in Section 7 of your agreement." I continued taking notes, asking specific questions about each item, watching Wilson grow increasingly comfortable as he interpreted my calm demeanor as acceptance. After 30 minutes of discussion about properties and finances, I finally asked the question burning within me. "Mr. Wilson, you've mentioned unique circumstances twice now. What exactly are these circumstances that justify my husband abandoning our marriage without discussion and attempting to leave me with a fraction of what we built together?" Wilson's expression shifted subtly. Mrs. Harrington, I assumed you were aware. Mr. Harrington felt it was best to proceed this way given the potential for conflict. He and Ms. Reynolds are hoping to move forward with their new life with minimal complications. The room seemed to tilt. Ms. Reynolds! Wilson's eyes widened slightly, realizing his mistake. Amanda Reynolds, Mr. Harrington's colleague. His hesitation made it clear that Amanda was far more than a colleague. Amanda Reynolds, Jason's executive assistant for the past 3 years. The woman who'd sent me flowers on my birthday with a card signed from Jason's office. The woman I'd invited to our holiday parties who'd smiled at me while apparently sleeping with my husband. I managed to keep my voice steady. I see. And how long have Mr. Harrington and Ms. Reynolds been planning their new life? Wilson shifted uncomfortably. I'm not at liberty to discuss the personal details of their relationship. Our focus today should be on reaching an equitable settlement that allows both parties to move forward. I nodded as though this made perfect sense, while inside a cold clarity was spreading through me. This wasn't just about Jason leaving me for another woman. This was about him trying to discard our entire marriage as cheaply and quickly as possible. Of course. Please continue. Relieved by my apparent compliance, Wilson moved on to discussing the timeline for finalizing the divorce. As he spoke, he casually mentioned something that made my ears perk up. Once the offshore transfers are complete, which should be within the week, the settlement funds will be available for distribution. Offshore transfers? I asked innocently. Wilson hesitated, then smoothed it over. Just some standard international account reconciliations. Nothing that affects your portion of the settlement. But I'd caught the slight flush on his neck, the way his eyes darted to his notes. Jason had money hidden overseas, money not accounted for in our disclosure documents, money he didn't want me to know about. For the remainder of the meeting, I played the role of the defeated wife, asking a few clarifying questions, but generally giving the impression that I was too overwhelmed to put up much resistance. When Wilson slid the settlement agreement toward me with a pen, I looked at it for a long moment. Before I sign, I'd like to take this home to review, just to make sure I understand everything. Wilson frowned slightly. Mrs. Harrington, I should advise you that Mr. Harrington is eager to resolve this matter quickly. Any delay might result in reconsideration of the generous terms being offered. I gave him what I hoped was a convincing look of intimidation. I understand. I just need 24 hours. This is a lot to process. After some reluctance, Wilson agreed, having me sign only a receipt acknowledging I'd received the documents. As I gathered my notes and stood to leave, he offered what I'm sure he thought was a sympathetic smile. For what it's worth, Mrs. Harrington, these situations are always difficult, but accepting the inevitable tends to be the least painful path forward. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What Wilson didn't know was that while he'd been talking, my phone had been in my jacket pocket recording every word of our conversation, including his slip about offshore accounts and Jason's affair. I left the imposing building with my head high, the recording secure on my phone, and a new sense of purpose burning through my shock and pain. Jason and his lawyer thought I would roll over, take the insultingly small settlement, and disappear quietly. They had grossly underestimated the woman they were dealing with. I didn't go straight home after the meeting with Wilson. Instead, I drove to an address in Lincoln Park that I'd found during my research, the offices of Sophia Rodriguez, one of Chicago's most respected divorce attorneys, known specifically for handling high-asset cases where one spouse had attempted to hide money from the other. I hadn't made an appointment, but the urgency of my situation must have been evident on my face because the receptionist managed to fit me in between Sophia's scheduled clients. When I was finally ushered into her office, a warm, elegant space that felt more like a living room than a law office, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd had in days. Sofia Rodriguez was not what I expected. Instead of the intimidating shark I'd imagined, she was a petite woman in her 40s, with kind eyes that belied the fierce intelligence behind them. She listened without interruption as I poured out my story. The sudden divorce announcement, the meeting with Wilson, my suspicions about hidden assets, and the recording I'd made. When I finished, she leaned forward. "First, let me say how sorry I am that you're going through this. What your husband is doing is not just hurtful, it's potentially illegal if he's hiding assets. Now about that recording, Illinois is an all-party consent state for recordings, which means what you did technically isn't admissible in court." My heart sank, but Sofia raised a hand. "However, it gives us valuable information to guide our investigation. We now know where to look and what questions to ask during formal discovery. That's extremely helpful." She opened a legal pad and began writing. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll file a counter-petition for divorce, requesting comprehensive financial disclosure. Second, we'll hire a forensic accountant specializing in hidden asset investigation. Third, we'll bring in a private investigator to document the timeline of your husband's affair, which may impact how the court views his actions regarding marital assets." The decisiveness in her voice was exactly what I needed. For the first time since Jason's phone call, I felt like I wasn't drowning. "What about the prenup?" I asked. "Wilson seemed very confident it would stand." Sofia smiled slightly. "Prenuptial agreements aren't bulletproof, especially when there's evidence of financial misconduct. If your husband has been hiding assets, he's violated the good faith disclosure requirements that make a prenup valid in the first place." By the end of our 2-hour meeting, we had a comprehensive strategy, and I had officially retained Sofia as my attorney. The retainer fee was substantial, requiring me to liquidate a small investment account Jason had apparently forgotten about, but it felt like the best money I'd ever spent. Over the next 3 weeks, our plan unfolded with precision. The private investigator Sofia hired a retired police detective named Frank Morales, uncovered evidence that Jason's relationship with Amanda had begun at least a year earlier, complete with photographic evidence of weekend getaways to hotels and restaurants, while I believed he was on business trips. More damning, Frank discovered that Jason had purchased a luxury condominium in Amanda's name 6 months earlier, a clear attempt to transfer marital assets before filing for divorce. The property was worth nearly $2 million, and every penny had come from our joint funds. Meanwhile, the forensic accountant Sofia brought in found a trail leading to accounts in the Cayman Islands containing just over $4 million money that had been systematically siphoned from Jason's bonuses over the past 2 years. Money that should have been part of our marital estate, but had been carefully hidden. The most shocking discovery came from my own investigation at home. While going through old files in Jason's home office, I found a draft amendment to our prenuptial agreement dated nearly a year earlier. The amendment significantly reduced my entitlements in case of divorce, but it had never been executed. There was no signature page. Jason had apparently drafted it, perhaps even intended to trick me into signing it, but for whatever reason had never followed through. The combination of the hidden property offshore accounts and unexecuted prenup amendment painted a clear picture Jason had been planning this divorce for at least a year, systematically hiding assets while continuing to play the role of loving husband. Each new discovery was like a knife to my heart, but also strengthened my resolve. The man I'd loved, the life we'd shared, it had been a carefully constructed illusion, at least for the past year. The realization was devastating but clarifying. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. This was about justice. Throughout this period, Jason remained unreachable except through Wilson. I learned he had moved in with Amanda, though they were keeping a low profile, aware that an obvious affair could complicate the divorce proceedings. My only contact with my husband was through our respective attorneys, a fact that still seemed surreal every time I thought about it. The emotional toll was immense. There were days I could barely get out of bed, crushed by the weight of betrayal and loss. But those days became fewer as anger and determination grew stronger than grief. I leaned heavily on Lindsay, and a small circle of trusted friends started seeing a therapist specializing in divorce trauma, and gradually began rebuilding my sense of self outside the identity of Jason's wife. Toll. By the time Sophia filed our counter petition with all the evidence we'd gathered, I was no longer the shell-shocked woman who had sat across from Thomas Wilson nodding meekly. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone unwilling to be victimized, and I was ready to fight. Everything changed the day our counter petition was filed. Within hours of the court receiving our documents complete with evidence of hidden assets, the undisclosed property purchased for Amanda, and the timeline of their affair, Thomas Wilson was calling Sophia's office, his previously condescending tone replaced by barely contained panic. "He wants to meet," Sophia told me, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Apparently your husband is very concerned about the direction this case is taking." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of control returning. Good. The next day, my phone rang with a number I recognized instantly: Jason's cell. After weeks of silence now, he wanted to talk. My hand trembled as I answered, heart pounding in my chest. "Hello, Jason." I worked to keep my voice neutral, though internally I was a storm of emotions. "Maeve." His voice was tight, angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing? These ridiculous accusations." "They're not accusations, Jason. They're facts. Facts supported by evidence that your lawyer has now seen." "You're making a huge mistake," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're getting into. If you push this, You'll what?" My voice was steady now, growing stronger with each word. "Hide more assets, date your assistant behind my back, plan my financial ruin while pretending to love me, because you've already done all that. This is going to get ugly, Maeve. I'm trying to protect you." I actually laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "Protect me? That's what you call emptying our accounts and trying to force me to accept a fraction of what's rightfully mine, some protection. You signed the prenup. You knew the terms." "The prenup requires full financial disclosure, Jason, something you conveniently ignored when you started tucking away millions in the Caymans. Oh, and buying property for your girlfriend with marital funds, also not covered by the prenup." There was silence on the line, and I could almost see him calculating, reassessing, realizing that his carefully constructed plan was crumbling. "We need to talk," he finally said, his tone shifting to something almost conciliatory. "Just you and me without the lawyers. We can work this out. We're well past that point, Jason. If you want to talk, you can do it in a deposition, under oath." I hung up before he could respond, hands shaking but heart strangely calm. The man I once thought I'd spend my life with was now a stranger, an adversary. The clarity of that realization was both painful and liberating. 2 days later, we were in court for an emergency hearing Sophia had requested to freeze all assets pending full financial disclosure. I sat beside her at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a conservative navy suit, focusing on maintaining my composure as Jason and Wilson took their seats across the aisle. It was the first time I'd seen Jason since before his divorce phone call. He looked thinner, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I'd never expected fear. Judge Eleanor Ramirez was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with a reputation for having little patience for financial shenanigans in divorce cases. She reviewed our filings with a furrowed brow, occasionally glancing up at Jason with undisguised disapproval. "Mr. Wilson," she finally said, "your client's financial disclosures appear to have some significant omissions." Wilson attempted to explain away the discrepancies, suggesting that any undisclosed accounts were simply oversight, not deliberate concealment. Judge Ramirez was having none of it. "An oversight of $4 million. That's quite a mathematical error, counselor." By the end of the hearing, the judge had frozen all known assets, ordered comprehensive financial disclosure, including international holdings, and scheduled a follow-up hearing in 2 weeks. Jason sat rigid throughout, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. The real turning point came during Jason's deposition 3 weeks later. Under Sophia's relentless questioning, with the evidence of his financial maneuvers laid bare, Jason's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. When Sophia played the recording from my meeting with Wilson not as legal evidence, but as a point of reference for questioning, the look of betrayal on Jason's face was almost comical given the circumstances. "So, Mr. Harrington," Sophia asked calmly, "would you like to revise your previous statements regarding when your relationship with Ms. Reynolds began and what marital funds were used to support that relationship?" The deposition lasted 6 grueling hours, during which Jason was forced to admit to the timeline of his affair, the property purchased for Amanda, and the existence of the offshore accounts. His only defense was technical arguing that some of the money had come from bonuses he considered separate property, not marital assets. By the time we left, Wilson's earlier confidence had evaporated. In the hallway outside the conference room, I overheard him urgently whispering to Jason, "We need to reconsider our position. Judge Ramirez will crucify you if this goes to trial." Word of the case had begun to spread through Chicago's financial community. Jason's firm, concerned about potential reputational damage, placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the divorce. Several major clients, uncomfortable with the ethical implications of his hidden accounts, requested new advisors. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and Jason was finally beginning to understand the true cost of his actions. 2 days after the deposition, Wilson contacted Sophia with a new settlement offer, one that acknowledged the full extent of the marital assets, including the previously hidden accounts, and proposed a much more equitable division. It was a dramatic shift from their initial position, but Sophia and I agreed it still wasn't enough. "They're running scared," Sophia told me. "We have leverage now, and we're going to use it." The media attention was an unexpected complication. A financial blog got wind of the case, publishing a piece about an unnamed but prominent Chicago investment banker facing serious allegations of financial misconduct in a divorce case. While they didn't use our names, anyone in financial circles could figure out who was involved. I received calls from reporters seeking comment, which Sophia advised me to politely decline. The attention was uncomfortable, but it added another layer of pressure on Jason to resolve the case quickly and quietly. Through it all, I kept my head high. At work, I threw myself into new projects, earning praise and eventually a promotion that felt like validation of my worth outside my failing marriage. At home, I began the painful process of reimagining my life as a single woman, sorting through shared possessions and memories, deciding what to keep and what to let go. It wasn't easy. There were still nights I cried myself to sleep, mornings I woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. But with each passing day, with each small victory in our legal battle, I grew stronger, more certain that whatever happened, I would be okay. After months of negotiations, depositions, and court appearances, we finally arrived at the settlement conference that would determine the end of my marriage. The final negotiation took place in a conference room at Sophia's firm, a neutral territory agreed upon by both sides. Jason sat across the table, flanked by Wilson and a financial advisor. Gone was the confident, almost arrogant man who'd believed he could discard me with a phone call and a pittance. In his place was someone who looked tired, defeated, and maybe, though I might have been projecting, ashamed. Sophia had prepared me well for this moment. We had our bottom lines clearly established, our evidence meticulously organized, and our leverage fully understood by all parties. This was no longer David versus Goliath. This was two equal opponents reaching the end of a battle neither had truly won. "Let's get straight to the point," Sophia began. "Our last counteroffer stands with one additional condition. Mrs. Harrington retains the primary residence outright with Mr. Harrington, covering the remaining mortgage as part of his settlement obligations." Wilson started to object, but Jason raised a hand to stop him. "I'll agree to that," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Over the next 4 hours, we hammered out the details of what would become our divorce settlement. The offshore accounts would be declared and divided equally. The property purchased for Amanda would be sold with the proceeds split between Jason and me. My share of Jason's retirement accounts and investments was calculated based on the full value, not the reduced figures initially presented. In the end, the settlement was far more than the paltry sum Jason had originally offered a victory by any financial measure. But as we sat there signing page after page of documents that dissolved 8 years of marriage, it felt like a hollow triumph. There was one moment as we were preparing to leave when Jason asked if he could speak to me privately. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed. Sophia gave me a concerned look, but stepped out of the room, leaving Jason and me alone for the first time since this ordeal began. "I'm sorry," he said simply. I studied his face, searching for the man I'd loved, the man I'd built a life with. For which part, Jason? For the affair? For hiding money? For trying to leave me with nothing? Or just for getting caught? He flinched. For all of it. I never meant for things to go this way. What way did you mean for them to go? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a carefully executed plan to discard me while keeping as much money as possible. It wasn't like that. Not at first. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I made one bad decision, then another, then I was in so deep I couldn't see a way out except forward. Forward meant destroying me. I know. He looked down at his hands. I convinced myself you'd be fine. That the settlement was fair. That it was better to make a clean break. I shook my head, amazed at his self-deception. There's nothing clean about betrayal, Jason. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what we'd lost hanging between us. Do you love her? I finally asked. Not sure why I needed to know. Jason hesitated. I thought I did. Now I'm not sure what I feel anymore. Well, I hope it was worth it. He looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps seeing the woman I'd become through this ordeal rather than the wife he'd discarded. It wasn't. Nothing could be. As I stood to leave, he asked, Will you be okay? The question nearly made me laugh. After everything he wanted, absolution wanted to believe I would be fine so he could sleep better at night. Yes, Jason, I'll be more than okay, but not because of anything you did, because of what I did, who I became when you tried to break me. I walked out without looking back, joining Sophia in the hallway. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, she squeezed my hand. You did it, Maeve. "It's over." But it wasn't really over. The legal battle was finished, but the journey of rebuilding my life was just beginning. In the months that followed, I experienced the full spectrum of post-divorce emotions. There were days of crippling sadness when the reality of my situation would hit anew. There were nights of sleepless anxiety about the future. There were moments of rage so intense I had to pull my car over because I couldn't see through my tears. But there were other moments too. Moments of unexpected joy, of rediscovery, of pride in my resilience. I kept the house our dream home, though at first it felt more like a mausoleum than a sanctuary. Every room held memories, echoes of a life that no longer existed. For weeks, I slept in the guest room, unable to face our bedroom. Then one weekend, in a burst of determination, I completely reimagined the space. New paint, new furniture, new artwork I'd always wanted, but Jason had vetoed. Room by room, I reclaimed our house as my house. I planted a garden I'd always wanted. I converted Jason's office into a yoga and meditation space. I hung art that spoke to me, played music I loved, invited friends over for dinners, where we laughed until our sides hurt. Therapy helped immensely. My counselor, Dr. Bennett, specialized in betrayal trauma and guided me through the process of grieving not just my marriage, but the future I'd imagined. She helped me recognize that Jason's actions reflected his character, not my worth. The way someone treats you, she told me during one particularly difficult session, is about them, not you. Your husband's choices reveal his values, his weaknesses, his character, not your lovability. Gradually, those words sank in, becoming a mantra. I returned to whenever self-doubt crept in. Work became another anchor. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was offered a promotion to Chief Creative Officer, a role I might never have pursued if still married to Jason, whose career had always taken precedence. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to diminish me, Jason had inadvertently set me free to soar higher than I might have otherwise. My support network expanded in unexpected ways. Friends I hadn't been close to during my marriage stepped up with invitations, check-ins, and practical help. My parents, initially devastated by the divorce, became fierce advocates for my happiness. Even Jason's sister Eliza remained in my life, our friendship surviving the end of my marriage to her brother. Dating again was terrifying. The first time a friend set me up with a colleague of her husband's, I nearly canceled 3 times. But I made myself go wearing a new dress in a bold color Jason had always said wasn't me. The date itself was nothing special. Pleasant conversation, no real spark, but it was a milestone nonetheless. I could sit across from another man, be present and engaged without constantly comparing him to Jason or feeling like I was betraying my marriage vows. It was the first of many small steps back into a world I hadn't navigated in nearly a decade. A year after the divorce was finalized, I heard through mutual friends that Jason and Amanda had split. Apparently, the relationship that had seemed worth destroying our marriage for hadn't survived the reality of everyday life together. Jason had moved to Boston for a fresh start, his once stellar career in Chicago effectively over. The news stirred complicated feelings, a flash of vindication, quickly followed by a wave of sadness for all that had been lost. Then finally, a surprising sense of peace. Jason's happiness or unhappiness was no longer my concern. His life had diverged from mine, and I wished him neither ill nor particularly well. He simply was not my problem anymore. On the anniversary of the day Jason called to end our marriage, I took myself on a solo trip to Sedona, a place I'd always wanted to visit, but Jason had dismissed as too new age. As I hiked among the stunning red rocks, breathing in the desert air, watching the play of light and shadow across the landscape, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Not gratitude for the betrayal or pain, but for the woman I had become through surviving them. For the strength I hadn't known I possessed. For the authenticity I'd discovered once the roles of wife and potential mother were stripped away. The lessons had been brutal but invaluable. I'd learned that no one else could define my worth, that I was capable of fighting for myself when necessary, that loss, however devastating, could be survived, that endings, however painful, made way for new beginnings. Most importantly, I'd learned that the capacity for joy isn't diminished by suffering, it's expanded. Having known real pain made me more appreciative of genuine happiness, more attuned to the simple pleasures of a life that was now truly mine. Standing on a vista overlooking the vast, beautiful landscape, I spread my arms wide, feeling the sun on my face and the wind in my hair. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, unequivocally free. Not because a man had left me, but because in trying to break me, he had instead revealed just how unbreakable I truly was. If you're going through something similar, remember that your worth isn't defined by someone else's inability to see it. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? How did you find your strength? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful chapters of your life come after the most painful ones.